Hi, before we start today's Q&A session, I just wanted to make it clear that the way I teach how to do the English and maths questions are based on the easiest way that I think a child needs to do their English and maths. But having said that, I need you to understand that different schools use different policies. So they have an English policy, they have a maths policy, and they have a specific way of teaching their children their English and their maths. And this can differ from school to school to school. Now, the reason they have a policy is because if they teach a child a certain way, let's say fractions in year one, they want to then build on that in year two, year three, year four, year five. So they use the same process throughout the years. The same with their English, but then if you go to a different school, if they have a certain policy and they teach them in a different way in year one, then they will teach that way in year two, three, four, five, etc. So sometimes it's hard for me as a teacher, a tutor who's teaching different children who've been to different schools, different processes, to know which policy their child has been learning in their school. Now, you may come across and see on different videos, oh, you can do math this way, you can do English this way, etc. That's all very well, but if your child has been taught in a certain way, in their school, and it's really, really important in primary that it's as close as possible to the way that their maths policy or their English policy works, then giving them a different, completely different way because it's quicker on another social media platform, then that really does not help your child because it goes against what they've been taught and how they understand it. Now, I'm going to give you my way of teaching the maths and the English, which may or may not conflict with what your child learns. So, for example, in some schools, they call the words that connect sentences together conjunctions. In other schools, they call them connectives. Okay, it's the same thing, it's just a different word. Now, I tend to use the word conjunctions. Your child might be used to saying connectives. So when I explain something to you, you need to be aware of that so that you can then transfer that information to your child because your child might turn around and go, what's a conjunction? I've never heard of a conjunction. Okay, that's because they know it as a connective. So I will try as much as possible to explain it in as many different ways as I can. And you need to be aware that, especially with maths, there are hundreds of ways of doing maths questions. Okay, the way I do it is not universal. Different schools will teach it in different ways, and that's what makes it challenging for some children. Now, if I teach it in a certain way and that you're not comfortable with that, that's fine. Just let me know and I will give you a different solution. I will give you a different way of doing it. But I'm going to try and cover as many bases as I can because I go to different schools as a supply teacher and I have to, mix and match and fit in with the different policies depending on what schools are teaching and how they're teaching it. Now, some of you may also look at the way I'm teaching and go, what is the point of that? That is just so long-winded. But you have to understand that your child is in primary school. This is not GCSE level. This is not A level. They need to know the nuts and bolts and the foundation before they can, do shortcuts and do tricks and tips and things like that. We don't do that in primary. Okay. It can feel very long-winded, but it's so that they can build that foundation. And then when they get fluent in their math, then they can do the tips and tricks later on. It's a bit like when you're learning to drive a car. Your driving instructor will make you do all the really boring, mundane, hold the steering wheel like this, look at your mirror, look at your indicator, da, da, da. You have to go through that process. And then once you've gone through that process, it becomes second nature. Then you do it automatically and you can do it without even thinking. Okay. But when you're starting out, especially in primary school, you have to go through all the steps. And then once you're familiar and you're confident with those steps, it's second nature, and then you don't need to think. Okay. So it is hard to teach a child in primary school. I get that. And it makes it doubly hard when different schools are teaching different policies. So I will try and make this as easy as possible, but you need to be aware that that is the case. And I know some of you are going to look at this and go, what is the point? It's like watching paint dry. But you need to look at it from the point of view of your child's brain is not fully developed. They are not going to understand the shortcuts because they don't have that knowledge to build on. They don't have a foundation to build on. And it is your job and my job to help them build that foundation first so that they can then, progress from there. So I hope that makes sense. And let's get into today's masterclass.